Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there is this expectation of like precision.
Oh, absolutely. It is almost like engineering.
Yeah, exactly. You break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line, and the doctor just points at the screen and says, well, there it is. We cast it for 6 weeks.
Right. It is clean. It is binary. And, I mean, we find a lot of comfort in that.
We really do.
Human beings just love when a problem can be made entirely visible and, neatly categorized.
But then you step into the world of human behavior or the structure of global society, and suddenly that x-ray machine is completely useless.
Oh, yeah. Totally useless.
We are looking at this diagnostic landscape of massive global issues. I mean, poverty, endless wars, systemic corruption, and it is all incredibly murky.
Yeah, and for thousands of years, our primary treatment plan for these societal diseases has essentially just been moral preaching.
Right. We just stand on podiums and tell people to be better, to be kinder, to be, less greedy.
Which is a treatment plan that, if we are looking at the historical record, hasn't actually cured the patient.
No, not at all.
The societal diseases we face today are remarkably similar in nature to the ones we faced centuries ago. They are just scaled up by technology and population size.
And that brings us directly into the fascinating and honestly highly provocative subject of today's deep dive.
Yeah, this is a big one.
We're looking at 2 really extensive texts written by an author named Xuefeng. These were published recently in 2022 and 2023.
Right.
And these sources, they lay out a radical, sweeping blueprint for human society. It is all centered around a concept called the Life Zen Center and its operational model, which the author calls the second home.
It really is an absolute reimagining of how human beings exist, how we interact, how we survive on this planet.
It touches everything.
Literally everything, from global economics to the most intimate details of your living room.
Now, before we get into the mechanics of this, I want to establish a very clear baseline with you, the listener.
Very important.
This deep dive is an impartial, analytical exploration of these texts. We are not endorsing the viewpoints, the political assertions, or the proposed societal models presented in these sources.
Right. We are just the messengers here.
Exactly. Our mission today is just to act as your guides to unpack the sheer scale, the underlying logic, and the structural architecture of the ideas this author has laid out.
We are inspecting the foundation of this proposed worldview. We're not telling you to buy the house.
Perfect way to put it. And the foundational thesis of that blueprint, the core premise that every subsequent idea rests upon, is this: moral preaching never works.
Yeah.
To fix a systemic problem, you have to completely change the underlying program or like the incentive structure that governs human behavior. Okay, let's unpack this.
Right. So to get the reader to buy into this rather cynical view of human nature, Xuefeng uses a really brilliant historical proof of concept.
Oh, I loved this part.
Yeah, the texts take us back to the 18th century to examine how the British government handled transporting prisoners to Australia.
This anecdote is just such a powerful illustration of the underlying mechanism the author wants to expose.
It really makes it click.
So picture this. The British government has 2 goals: relieve domestic prison overcrowding and provide labor to develop Australia.
Simple enough.
Right. So to execute this, they hire private ship owners to transport these prisoners across the ocean.
But the flaw was in the program itself. The incentive structure they created was just entirely broken.
Because the government decided to pay these private ship owners based on the number of prisoners who physically boarded the ship before it left the British port.
Which, I mean, you can immediately see the horrifying disaster waiting to unfold here.
Not completely. The ship captains are rational actors trying to maximize profit. So they simply crammed as many human beings into the cargo holds as physically possible.
Yeah, the air was foul, disease ran rampant, the conditions were just abysmal.
And frankly, the captains had no financial reason to care at all. Their payment was already secured the moment the prisoners stepped on the deck.
Exactly. The sources point out that this specific incentive structure led to an appalling average death rate of 12%.
12%.
Yeah, and there was a highlight of one specific ship that loaded 424 prisoners, and 158 of them died before ever seeing the Australian coast.
That is just staggering. So, confronted with this humanitarian nightmare, the British government attempted what Xuefeng categorizes as moral intervention.
Right. They tried to regulate it.
Yeah, they imposed strict living standards on paper. They sent government officials and medical doctors to sail on these voyages to oversee the conditions.
They wanted them to treat the sick, and essentially protect the prisoners.
Right. They tried to enforce a moral compass onto the situation.
But moral intervention just completely collided with the financial program.
Right. Because the ship owners, they wanted to maintain their profit margins without spending money on better food or medical supplies.
So they simply bribed the officials and the doctors to look the other way.
And if an official or a doctor happened to have, an incorruptible moral compass and refused the bribe.
The ship crews just threw them overboard into the middle of the ocean.
Whoa.
Yeah. The death rate stayed astronomically high because the underlying code, getting paid to load bodies, had not been rewritten.
So the government finally realizes you cannot preach your way out of a bad system.
Nope.
They changed the payment program. They entirely stopped paying for prisoners who boarded, and they initiated a new contract.
A very simple one.
Very simple. They would only pay for prisoners who arrived safely in Australia.
And the shift in human behavior was instantaneous.
It is wild. Almost overnight, the ship owners became fiercely protective of the prisoners.
Yeah, they improved the rations, they cleaned the cargo holds. They actively sought out and paid doctors out of their own pockets to keep everyone healthy.
And the death rate plummeted from 12% down to a staggering 1%.
It is incredible.
It's like a multiplayer video game where players keep griefing each other. You don't jump on the microphone and beg everyone to play nice.
Right, they will just ignore you or laugh at you.
Exactly. Instead, you patch the game mechanics, you change the code so that cooperating gets them more points.
And suddenly, everyone is working together.
Right. You change the code, you change the behavior.
What's fascinating here is how effectively this data point strips away the illusion of innate morality in large systems.
Right. The ship captains weren't evil people who suddenly experienced a spiritual awakening.
No, they were just operating inside an evolving incentive structure. Xuefeng's argument is that if a terrible situation persists for generations, do not bother with moral sermons.
Yeah.
Rewrite the program, and the bad situation vanishes by default.
Which brings us to the real scale of this blueprint. Because if this program rewrite logic works for a 1700 shipping route, how does it apply to the modern world?
Right, because we aren't talking about a few wooden boats and a few hundred prisoners anymore.
No, we're talking about the entire globe.
Exactly. Moving into the 2023 text, the scope expands to address the survival of Earth's 7+ billion people.
A slightly bigger sample size?
Just a bit. And the premise is that humanity is currently depleting resources far past the planet's ability to regenerate.
Okay.
To explain why we are driving ourselves toward the cliff, the blueprint diagnoses traditional human society with 8 specific terminal maladies.
Let's group these maladies together, because it really paints a comprehensive picture of what Xuefeng believes is the fundamentally broken code of our current reality.
Good idea.
Let's start with the economic engine.
Okay, so the economic diagnosis is brutal. First, there is massive resource depletion.
Right.
This is driven by a system where everyone is conditioned to be a consumer, but almost no one is an adder to the natural world.
We just take and take.
Second, this is compounded by the immense wasting of resources on luxury. The text points out that a huge portion of what we consume for food, clothing, housing, and transportation isn't actually for survival.
It's unnecessary luxury driven by ego.
Right, and no amount of moral pleading will stop people from wanting it.
And then there's the structural side of the economy.
Yeah, finally, the blueprint argues that our current economic models are trapped in a binary failure. Government-planned economies inevitably stifle innovation and cause widespread depression.
While free market economies inevitably devolve into the law of the jungle.
Exactly, where the strong just ruthlessly consume the weak.
So that's the economic engine. But then the texts dig into what we might call the social and spiritual rot.
Right, the cultural side.
There is official corruption, which Xuefeng claims will never be solved by electing better people.
Because our traditional lifestyle is the literal fertile soil that grows corruption.
Yeah. Then there is the wealth gap. The texts acknowledge that some disparity is natural due to different talent levels, but extreme wealth gaps inevitably breed societal conflict.
And tying that social rot together is what the author calls the magic, corrupting power of money.
A magic power.
Right. When the pursuit of abstract currency becomes the absolute core motivation for survival, it forces human beings into endless social turmoil.
It takes the natural act of living and turns it into a stressful, lifelong transaction.
Which leads directly to a total loss of societal trust.
You know, the loss of trust point really caught my eye.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. As populations grow and resources shrink, competition spikes. trust plummets. And this creates massive, what the author calls transaction costs.
Right.
Think about how much energy, time, and money our society spends simply because we don't trust each other.
It is exhausting.
We need complex contracts, armies of lawyers, security cameras, audits, background checks.
It is an incredibly inefficient way to run a civilization.
And of course, the final malady is geopolitical, national conflicts, and the staggering waste of massive military spending.
Nations fighting over lines on a map and hoarding resources.
Now, wait a minute. I want to push back on this diagnosis a bit, specifically regarding the resource depletion and the inefficiency.
Okay, let's hear it.
The obvious modern counterargument is technology. The author claims that technological leaps and new energy are just a drop in the bucket. But why couldn't tech save us? I mean, we have solar power, we have artificial intelligence, optimizing grids. We are literally inventing our way out of these constraints.
If we connect this to the bigger picture the author is drawing, technology is viewed merely as a tool operating inside the current, flawed program.
Okay.
If the underlying code is still driven by greed, national competition, and luxury consumption, then better technology just makes humans more efficiently destructive. It's like putting a much faster, more powerful engine into a car that's already steering toward a cliff. You don't need more speed, you need an entirely new steering mechanism.
So the traditional lifestyle itself, the very way we organize our desires, is the problem.
Exactly.
Okay, so if moral preaching is out and technological salvation is just a faster engine on a doomed car, what does this ultimate program rewrite actually look like on a global scale?
Well, the proposal is the complete replacement of traditional production and lifestyles. The author wants to copy a concept called the 1,000-year world of heaven.
That sounds intense. What does that mean in this context?
In this context, that refers to a conceptual state of absolute, frictionless equilibrium and perfectly balanced resources.
Okay.
And the author wants to drag that concept down to earth and implement it via a model called the second home.
A second home.
Yeah. On a macro scale, the very first mandatory step of this new program is the complete dissolution of all nations.
Just erasing the borders entirely.
Yeah.
Taking a giant eraser to the globe.
Global unification. National governments disappear entirely.
Wow.
Once the borders are gone, the global population would be strictly managed to stay below the Earth's natural resource regeneration limits.
So resources are no longer hoarded by superpowers.
Exactly. They are pooled globally. Citizens would flow freely around the world in a meticulously planned logistical manner.
And what is the end goal for the individual in this?
The ultimate state of being for a human in this system is described by a very specific phrase: owning nothing, possessing everything.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because if you apply the logic of the ship captains to this new borderless map, Xuefeng's math actually checks out regarding that final malady.
You mean war?
Yeah, war. If there are no nations, there is no one left to fight.
Right.
The text says, rather poetically actually, you are in me and I am in you who is there to fight.
It makes logical sense within the framework.
By simply deleting the concept of countries, massive military spending drops to zero. You don't need to preach peace, you just remove the boundaries that define us versus them, and the mechanism for large-scale conflict vanishes.
It's a complete structural bypass of the problem.
It is an elegant theoretical solution. If the game doesn't have teams, you can't have a team war.
Exactly. But the texts don't stop at the global map. Erasing borders is just the macro level.
Right.
The deep dive gets much more intense and, frankly, much more personal when we zoom in from the dissolution of nations to the living room.
Because the second home model doesn't just want to reorganize supply chains.
No, it wants to completely rewrite the life cycle of a human being.
This is where the blueprint requires the most radical departure from our current reality.
Yeah, it fundamentally alters traditional biological and social structures.
Yeah.
Let's walk through what a human life actually looks like inside this second home patch, starting from birth.
Let's do it. So when a child is born in the second home, they are not raised by their biological parents.
Right.
The texts make a really bold, controversial claim here. They argue that the vast majority of parents possess flawed, incomplete, and highly biased worldviews.
Which, I mean, is hard to argue against on some level.
Sure, but they take it to the extreme. They say when parents raise their own children, they inherently pass on these defective values, passing down generational trauma and setting the kids up for frustration.
Right. And to fix this, The new program completely removes the burden and the privilege of child-rearing from the parents.
They just take it out of the equation.
Yeah. Children are placed into a collective environment to be raised by what the text calls spiritually perfect teachers.
Spiritually perfect teachers.
Yes. In the context of this blueprint, these aren't just good tutors. These are guides who have theoretically transcended personal ego and biological bias.
Wow.
They're operating purely on objective harmony to curate a perfect worldview for the next generation.
Let me stop right there, because if you are listening to this right now, your alarm bells are probably ringing.
Oh, absolutely.
Taking kids away from their parents to be raised by spiritually perfect strangers sounds incredibly dystopian.
It does.
It sounds like the premise of a cautionary sci-fi novel, not a utopia. How do the sources possibly justify severing the most fundamental biological bond we have?
This raises an important question, and it's really the crucible of the entire blueprint.
Yeah.
The text justifies it as a necessary mathematical exchange. It is demanding an extreme trade-off. You must sacrifice your individual biological attachments, like your exclusive claim to your offspring, in exchange for absolute, friction-free societal harmony.
So it's a trade.
Exactly. It frees the parents from the endless labor and financial stress of child-rearing while ensuring the child isn't damaged by the parents' flaws.
It is just so radical.
And crucially, Xuefeng claims this isn't just theory. The texts state that this exact second home model, including the collective raising of children, has already been successfully tested in reality for 10 to 15 years.
They claim they have the proof of concept, just like the British ships.
Right.
And as this child grows into adulthood, the radical changes continue. Because in the second home, the institution of marriage is entirely abolished.
Just gone.
Gone.
The blueprint looks at marriage and sees an incredibly inefficient machine generating massive amounts of psychological friction.
Yeah, the pain, the jealousy.
Right. The endless conflict of romantic ownership is, according to the text, simply not worth it. So they apply the ship captain logic again.
If marriage is the program causing the pain, delete the program.
Exactly. No marriage equals no marital pain. Romantic and physical connections exist, sure, but the legal and social ownership of another person is entirely erased.
And as this person ages into their twilight years, the system shifts again to address elderly care.
Which is a huge issue today.
We all know the crushing modern anxieties around this. Pensions failing, nursing homes being prohibitively expensive or severely neglectful. The author quotes a rather heartbreaking proverb, actually. Many devoted parents, few devoted children.
Yeah. The argument is that relying on your biological children for care, or relying on modern financial instruments like reverse mortgages, ultimately fails to protect the elderly, especially the poor.
Right.
In the second home, because you didn't raise your biological children, you don't rely on them.
That makes sense.
All elderly individuals, regardless of their past wealth, spend their final years cared for entirely by the collective system, completely removing financial anxiety from the aging process.
Which brings us to the end of the life cycle.
Death.
The texts highlight a very real modern complaint. People say they literally can't afford to die because cemetery plots, caskets, and funeral services have become a prohibitively expensive, commercialized grief industry.
It is a huge burden on families. In response, the author introduces the Life Zen Center funeral system.
And what does that do?
It's designed to make dying not just cheap, but elegant. By collectivizing the process, it strips away the expensive monument building and ego of traditional funeral.
Okay.
It frames passing as a standardized, natural, and graceful ecological return. It is the final optimization of the human life cycle, ensuring that even in death, no resources are wasted and no financial burden is left behind.
So if we step back and look at the whole picture here, we have a proposed program that deletes nations, pools global resources, erases marriage, collectivizes children, and standardizes death.
There's the blueprint.
It claims it can instantly solve everything from resource wars to the anxiety of paying for a funeral. But a system that requires the total surrender of individuality doesn't just run on autopilot. It requires an absolute architect.
Right, someone has to build the system.
Exactly. Who actually has the authority or the capability to write and install this massive world-altering software update for humanity?
Well, the text concludes with a highly specific and very grandiose assertion about leadership.
I am intrigued.
Xuefeng states that looking across all of human history and all current leaders, there is only one figure capable of ushering humanity into this unified era.
And who's that?
This figure is identified as the Hundun Yuanshu, or primal chaos, of the Life Zen Center.
Okay, primal chaos.
Yeah. To contextualize how massive a claim this is, the text states that this figure actually surpasses the prophesied Zue sage.
The Zue sage. For background for you listening, the Zue sage is a revered messianic figure in Chinese esoteric and prophetic traditions.
Right.
Essentially the ultimate benchmark for divine wisdom and societal salvation.
And by claiming their leader exceeds the Zue sage, the blueprint is establishing absolute, unquestionable administrative authority over the new global code.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now?
Yeah, how do we wrap this up?
We've traced a really fascinating line from the survival incentives of ship captains in the 1700s all the way to a proposed modern utopia where the very fabric of human intimacy is rewritten by a single architect.
It is a wild journey.
Whether you view this as a brilliant philosophical thought experiment or a deeply controversial manifesto, it fundamentally challenges how you view the root causes of your daily stressors.
The diagnosis the sources provide is honestly incredibly sharp.
It really is.
They accurately pinpoint very real, palpable modern anxieties. The crushing weight of the cost of living, the isolation of modern aging.
The exhaustion of navigating a hyper-competitive market economy.
Right, and the endless transaction costs of not trusting your neighbor. But the friction comes from the cure. To achieve this pain-free terrarium, the author's solution requires surrendering the messy, painful, but deeply human core of individuality.
It's the ultimate systemic patch. You don't have to worry about paying for your funeral or fighting with your spouse or saving for your kid's college because those concepts simply no longer exist.
Right, they're patched out.
We started this deep dive looking at how changing the rules of payment saved lives on an 18th century ship. We followed that logic to a global blueprint that erases nations and redesigns the human family.
It is a lot to take in.
It is. But it leaves us with a lingering thought. The texts make a compelling case that changing the program guarantees a better outcome.
Sure.
But if humanity is essentially a software program waiting for an update, we have to ask, who gets the ultimate admin rights to write the code?
That is the big question.
And what happens to the people who refuse to click accept on the new terms and conditions? Thank you so much for exploring these wild, muddy diagnostic waters with us today. Keep questioning the code. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.